A 90-year-old grandmother was brutally shot dead. But the very next second, her contorted body began to writhe. Under the grandmother's fierce assault, the man was slammed straight into the next room. The man pulled the glass shards out of his shoulder, quickly reloaded his shotgun, and aimed the weapon at the hole in the wall. Yet he waited for a long time without any movement. After a fierce battle, the man finally killed the vampire grandma. With the fight over, he used pliers to extract her fangs. These vampire teeth could fetch him a high reward. The man's name was Bud. He usually worked as a simple janitor, but after unlocking his portable toolbox and gearing up with his weapons, he transformed into a cold-blooded vampire hunter. However, his family knew nothing of this identity. His ambitious wife, looking down on his janitorial job, had divorced him. Now, because he couldn't afford his daughter's tuition, his ex-wife planned to sell the house and take their daughter back to her parents. To prevent his daughter from leaving, Bud promised to scrape together the $10,000 tuition fee as soon as possible. He drove to a black market pawn shop, planning to sell his fresh haul of vampire teeth for a good price. To his dismay, the current market price was ridiculously low. A pair of fangs would only fetch $800. He knew these could sell for a high price of $4,000 at the Hunters Union. Unfortunately, Bud had made a mistake in the past and was now blacklisted by the union. To convince the boss to add a little more to the price, Bud explained his difficult situation. But the boss, upon hearing he was desperate for cash, took advantage, pressing the price even lower by claiming the teeth were of poor quality. An angry Bud pulled out his handgun. He wasn't going to shoot the boss, but rather sell this precious item too, since the boss offered him a high price for it. However, this scumbag shockingly tried to fleece him, demanding that Bud also package his shoes for free. Even after selling the handgun, Bud still looked worried. This money was still not enough for his daughter's tuition, and he had nothing left to sell. With nowhere left to turn, a desperate Bud sent a distress text to his former partner. Bud's old partner was none other than Snoop Dogg. With Snoop Dogg's help, Bud successfully made it to the headquarters of the Hunters Union. He wanted to get his job back and earn the lucrative bounty. However, the manager tossed out a stack of files thicker than an encyclopedia, all of them Bud's violation records from past missions. Facing the manager's interrogation, Bud could only plaster on a smile, eat crow, and bow his head in apology. Snoop Dogg also stepped in to vouch for him, assuring the manager that Bud was a changed man. The manager decided not to press the matter, agreeing to give Bud one more chance. Nevertheless, he warned Bud that there would be no compensation for workplace injury during the probation period. To further restrict Bud, the manager assigned Seth as his new partner to monitor his missions for any rule breaking. But it was immediately clear that the timid Seth had no experience in executing a mission. To prevent Seth from becoming a liability, Bud told him to wait in the car while he went in alone to hunt the vampires. Arriving at the bowling alley, Bud found several vampires engaged in a feeding frenzy. Meanwhile, Seth, waiting outside, received a call from the manager asking about Bud. Upon learning that Bud was acting alone again, the manager was furious and demanded that Seth stick to him like glue. A reluctant Seth had no choice but to brace himself and walk into the bowling alley. Seeing his backup arrive, Bud urgently yelled at Seth to hand over the shotgun. Decided to take the afternoon off to give Seth time to recover and continue the fight tomorrow. The scene shifts to a construction site. A vampire was tied under rebar, and the sunlight was scorching his skin, making him shriek in agony. At that moment, a woman walked over with an umbrella, temporarily shielding him from the sun. From their conversation, we learned that the man was a stubborn resident in the area, a tough nail house holdout. The woman, Audrey, was a real estate mogul and also the leader of the local vampires. Since the man refused to cooperate with the demolition and preferred death over moving, the soft-hearted Audrey did not want to force him. She could only respect the man's wishes, to let him stay on this land forever. She instructed a worker to start the tanker, and tons of concrete poured down, burying the man in moments. As night fell, with the threat of the sun gone, the vampire Audrey walked home, swaying her graceful figure. But upon entering her house, she found a mess, and her 90-something-year-old daughter had been decapitated. Watching her daughter's body and head separated, Audrey shed tears of sadness. Just then, her bodyguard found a piece of glass on the floor, which still had traces of Bud's blood on it. The next day, the pawnshop owner was looking up files when the heavy steel door was suddenly rattled by an urgent knocking. It turned out to be the vampire Audrey who had come calling. She flipped open the boss's drawer, where many vampire teeth were stored. She took one out and smelled it under her nose. It was indeed the fang of her daughter. To force the boss to reveal the source of the teeth, she prepared to use pliers to pull out all of the boss's teeth. On the other side, after a night of rest, Bud was ready to start a new hunt. However, considering yesterday's close call, he decided to first redeem his concealed handgun. Upon arriving at the pawn shop, he found the boss had been killed, and the word Bud had been spelled out on the table using teeth. Sensing the immediate danger, Bud quickly retrieved his handgun and prepared to take Seth and leave. But Seth stubbornly refused to go, insisting on calling the manager to report the incident. This infuriated Bud. He snatched Seth's phone and told him that if the manager found out, he would be suspended for a month. If that happened, he wouldn't earn the tuition, and his daughter would leave him. Seth finally understood why Bud was so desperate to hunt vampires and abandoned the idea of reporting the matter. Preoccupied with his worries, Bud returned to his apartment and saw his neighbor Heather arguing with a strange man. But Bud didn't have the time to break up a fight. He went home and immediately locked the 7 deadbolt locks on his door. Recalling the day's events, Bud knew he was in big trouble this time. But to quickly earn enough for his daughter's tuition, he couldn't afford to dwell on it. That day, Bud was out staking out a location when he ran into the Union's ace hunters, the Kevin brothers. After a discussion, they decided to team up, hunt the vampires together, and split the profits. To protect Seth, Bud thoughtfully had him put on a neck guard to prevent him from being bitten by a vampire. Once everyone was geared up, the 3 veteran hunters, with Seth the newbie in tow, stormed the vampire's lair in full force. It must be said that there is strength in numbers. This time, they easily dispatched the vampires inside the house in a few swift moves. But as they searched the room, Bud suddenly realized something was wrong.
It's a hive!
Finally, all the vampires in the house were taken care of. However, while counting the bodies, Seth realized that these vampires were of different subspecies. They never usually lived together. Their presence, all gathered in one place, was highly unusual. But Bud didn't have time to ponder the reason behind this because he had to rush to pick up his daughter from school or his ex-wife would chew him out again. Arriving at the school while waiting for his daughter, Bud suddenly received a threatening phone call. It was from Audrey. At the same time, the team she had sent had already located the school. Bud noticed that the one-eyed man was the very man who had been arguing with his neighbor, Heather. It looked like he had been tracked for a while. He quickly shoved his daughter into the car, preparing to leave the area fast. As for the one-eyed man following them, Bud immediately decapitated him with a single swipe of his knife. Following this, a fierce car chase began. Don't let Bud's beat-up pickup truck fool you. Its off-road capability was genuinely strong. With the boost of protagonist plot armor, Bud's rusty pickup remained unscathed throughout the chase. In contrast, the enemy's advanced vehicles, due to reckless driving, crashed and exploded one after another. Finally, Bud shook off the enemies behind him and escaped home with his daughter. But the moment he opened the front door, they fell into an ambush. The vampire Audrey had been waiting there for a long time, and his partner, Seth, had even been captured. His ex-wife, Jocelyn, looked at Bud and demanded to know what kind of trouble he'd gotten into this time. Since things had come to this, Bud no longer hid the truth and revealed that he was a vampire hunter. Jocelyn, however, didn't believe it at all. But when she looked up and saw Audrey's fangs, she suddenly panicked. Seeing how much Bud cherished his family, Audrey decided to torment him. She took Bud's wife and daughter, planning to turn them into vampires as well, and then force Bud to hunt and kill them himself. Having said her piece, she ordered her subordinates to knock Bud unconscious before sweeping out the door. In the middle of the night, Bud and Seth both woke up from their coma. The waking Seth felt a little uncomfortable and went to the mirror to check himself. He discovered he had grown 2 vampire fangs, and his body was invisible. He had been turned into a vampire by Audrey. Seth was terrified by his physical change, yet the thirst for blood simultaneously sent a surge of excitement through him. Just as Bud was feeling deeply remorseful about everything, the decapitated Seth suddenly spoke. Seth fumbled on the ground for his head, picked it up, and put it back on. Bud stared, completely bewildered by the sight. Despite his years of experience, this was the first time he had seen something like this. It turned out that Seth had been infected and turned into a special uber vampire. Even if they were decapitated, as long as the head was reattached quickly, their powerful healing ability could restore them to normal. Just like that, Seth supported his head, waiting for it to fully heal. Bud drove to his apartment building. He broke into his neighbor Heather's house and demanded to know what her relationship with the vampires was. After a period of friendly communication, communication, Bud finally learned the truth. The old vampire grandma he had killed was actually Audrey's daughter. That's why Audrey had kidnapped Bud's wife and daughter to exact her revenge. Heather was merely a poor soul who had been turned into a vampire by Audrey. Just as Bud figured out the whole situation, Seth walked in, shaking and supporting his head. Seeing this, Heather quickly took out a blood bag to replenish Seth's energy, which helped his head reattach completely. Before Bud could even outline his plan for revenge, the fully recovered Seth loudly demanded they go for vengeance. He swore he had to kill the person who turned him into a vampire. Heather immediately said she wanted to join in. The three of them instantly clicked. They quickly geared up and, guided by Heather, headed straight for the vampire's den. Just as the three of them were unsure how to proceed, a vehicle suddenly burst through the entrance. It was Snoop Dogg. Snoop Dogg was shouldering a Gatling gun and immediately let loose with a torrent of firepower, easily wiping out the vampire foot soldiers. Heather suggested they split up. Snoop Dogg and Bud, being mere mortals, would take the relatively safe secret path. She and Seth would take the more dangerous express route. But they hadn't accounted for Audrey, the centuries-old vampire, who was smarter than the devil himself. She had already set an ambush in the safe, secret passage. Vampires disguised as stone statues sprung out behind them, catching them completely off guard. Snoop Dogg was unfortunately bitten on the neck. To cover Bud, Snoop Dogg shoved him out of the way, then shot the iron gate, jamming it shut. He planned to hold off the vampires behind him alone, buying Bud time to escape. However, Snoop Dogg quickly ran out of bullets. In his final moments, he revealed his ultimate weapon.
West Side for life.
Bud saw the blue light flare up behind him and knew Snoop Dogg had been killed. But before he could grieve, he was seized by the throat by the vampire bodyguard. Just as the two were facing off across a coffin, Seth and Heather arrived from the express route. Heather urged Bud to hurry and rescue his family, leaving the bodyguard to the two of them. Seeing Bud escape, the bodyguard let out a roar, relaying the information to his boss, Audrey. She was dragging Bud's ex-wife, Jocelyn, and threw her off a high platform. Bud saw this and immediately fired his gun, but Audrey easily dodged the shot. Meanwhile, outside, Heather and Seth were also getting badly beaten. The bodyguard easily grabbed both of their throats simultaneously. But Bud was not so lucky. Audrey was moments away from turning him into a vampire. At this crucial moment, Jocelyn grabbed a wooden stake and stabbed Audrey right through the chest. An enraged Audrey slapped Jocelyn away and aggressively charged toward her. While Audrey was distracted, Bud quickly scrambled to his feet and fired a silver bullet at her. To his surprise, not even the silver bullet harmed Audrey in the slightest. Watching her charge at him, Bud could only close his eyes in despair, awaiting death. It turned out that the silver wire ambush Bud had set up earlier did the trick, decapitating Audrey instantly. With all the immediate danger resolved, Bud reunited with his wife and daughter, along with Seth, and prepared to leave.
That's what I love about LA.
Today we're going to take a look at a new film, Nosferatu. The story takes place in Germany. One night Ellen is praying to an angel as something has happened to her. She feels a lack of care and affection and hopes to receive a blessing from God. Her prayer doesn't reach the angel, but it is heard by a vampire. The vampire falls in love with Ellen and wants to unite with her, to love her forever. Ellen deeply longs for someone to care for her. In response to the vampire, she agrees and vows to be with him. Years pass quickly, and Ellen gets married to a man named Thomas. After they met, Ellen gradually forgets the vow she made during her prayer. On the second day of their marriage, Thomas has to go to work. He has found a job in real estate sales. It's his first day of the interview. Although Ellen doesn't want him to leave, she agrees for the sake of their future family. The boss has a very good first impression of Thomas. Thomas has a good appearance, and the boss learns from his resume that Thomas just got married. He believes that a newlywed husband will work harder for the family and for a higher salary. After a brief self-introduction from Thomas, the boss agrees to hire him and introduces the specific work to him. The boss has been dealing with a foreign count lately. This count is a very old nobleman who lives in a castle in the mountains. Now the count wants to move to their town, and he has already chosen his new home, Glenwood Manor. Thomas knows that the manor is abandoned, and he doesn't quite understand why the count would choose it. The boss explains that people from noble backgrounds usually prefer old houses. This count has a very strange personality, which is why he chose Glenwood Manor. The Count is old and in poor health, and he still lives in his old castle. The boss wants Thomas to go to the castle, sign the contract, and bring the Count back. In order to earn the commission, Thomas reluctantly had to go home and tell Ellen about it. Ellen wasn't happy about it. First, because they would be separated so soon after their marriage, and second, because of a dream she had before. The content of the dream was ominous. In the dream, she saw a wedding, but it wasn't in a church. It took place in another location she couldn't quite place. A strong wind swept through dark clouds, making it very frightening. The wedding ceremony also had an altar, but the groom didn't seem to be Thomas. She could only see a man dressed in black. They exchanged vows and appeared very happy together. But when they turned around, everyone was dead. Ellen didn't know what the dream was trying to predict, but she just felt it was unlucky. That's why she didn't want Thomas to go. Thomas thought it was just a nightmare Ellen had when she was younger, and over time it had caused some psychological issues, but he didn't take it seriously. For the sake of earning the commission, Thomas still decided to go. Before he left, he entrusted Ellen to his good friend. For the 6 weeks he would be away on the business trip, his friend and his wife would take care of Ellen. The friend's family was quite wealthy, and they had 2 daughters. Right now, the wife was pregnant, and it was expected to be a boy. The next morning, Thomas was about to leave. The night before, Ellen made him a small gift, a heart-shaped pendant. She even thoughtfully cut a lock of her hair and placed it inside the pendant. Meanwhile, the real estate boss was at home conducting some sort of ritual, seemingly pledging allegiance to someone.
He shall presently be in thy rule, thy contract!
2 weeks later, Thomas arrived near the castle. Seeing that it was getting late, he decided to rest for the night at a hotel at the foot of the mountain and visit the Count's house the next day. The locals, noticing that Thomas was a stranger, asked him what brought him here. Thomas explained that he had a client living in the castle on the mountain and was here to sign a real estate contract. Upon hearing this, the people at the hotel urged him to quickly leave and never go near the castle, but Thomas explained that it was already nearly nightfall and he had nowhere else to go. He suggested to the staff that he would pay double the price to stay for the night. The others also advised Thomas not to go to the castle and warned him to be cautious of the Count's shadow. They explained that the shadow could trap people in nightmares, and the only way to avoid it was to pray for protection. In the end, Thomas decided to stay at the hotel for the night. That night, Thomas was suddenly awakened by a loud noise. The residents were all up, and it was quite noisy. When Thomas woke up again, the hotel was empty. Noticing the mud on his shoes, Thomas realized he must have gone out last night, but what exactly happened afterward was a complete mystery to him. It seemed like something significant occurred, because the people who were there the night before had all left, and even took his horse with them. Now it was impossible for him to return, so his only option was to head to the Count's castle. As Thomas walked, the environment began to change. The trees grew denser, blocking out all sunlight. He soon saw a carriage approaching which almost collided with him. However, in the blink of an eye, the carriage stopped right in front of him and the door opened automatically. Thomas stepped inside and the carriage began driving itself toward the castle. During the ride, Thomas felt a tightness in his chest and soon lost consciousness. When he woke up again, he was already at the castle gates. The Count himself came out to greet him. Their scheduled meeting time had been midnight, but Thomas was late and apologized. The Count explained that after midnight his servants were off duty, so he had come to meet Thomas personally. He then asked Thomas to present the contract and they proceeded to sign it. The contract had been written by Thomas's boss. Thomas hadn't had the chance to carefully review the details of the contract, but the Count insisted that there was no need for him to go over it again and that he could sign it immediately. Curious, Thomas asked why the Count was moving. The Count explained that in the countryside, the people were superstitious. He wanted to experience the modern life of the big city and try something different. He believed that people in the city didn't believe in superstitions or terrifying legends, which made it preferable to the countryside. Then, the Count handed Thomas a piece of bread and casually asked if he was married.
Come by the fire.
Meanwhile, Ellen had become close friends with her friend's wife after more than 2 weeks of spending time together. Ellen shared with her what she had dreamed about as a child, feeling that Thomas had saved her. When Ellen was young, her mind was full of darkness, but everything had gotten better after meeting Thomas. However, she always felt that something shadowy was lurking around her, constantly haunting her. Her friend's wife had heard Thomas mention that Ellen had some mental issues when she was young, so she didn't take Ellen's story too seriously. When Thomas woke up, he realized the Count was gone. and he felt a sharp pain in his chest. Looking in the mirror, he saw several small holes, as though something had bitten him. His body didn't seem to have any serious issues, so he just wanted to sign the contract quickly and get home. He waited until nightfall and then the Count reappeared. After the Count signed, he asked Thomas to sign the salesperson section of the contract. Thomas thought it needed his boss's signature as this was a task assigned by him, and he was just the one running errands. But the Count insisted that Thomas sign it, even promising him a doubled commission. The Count also noticed the pendant that Ellen had given to Thomas and asked to see it. Thomas didn't think much of it and handed it to the Count. The Count congratulated him on his marriage, praising Thomas for finding true love, while handing him the commission, a large bag of gold coins. Seeing the commission, Thomas eagerly signed his name on the contract. Now that the contract was done, Thomas just wanted to leave as soon as possible, but the Count said Thomas was in poor health and insisted he stay and rest for the night, planning to talk again in the morning. At that moment, Thomas suddenly realized that he hadn't gotten the pendant back from the Count. It seemed the Count had forgotten about it and left the room without returning it. The next morning, Thomas was suddenly awoken. The situation was exactly the same as the day before. The castle was empty, and the gates were locked tightly, making it impossible to leave. Seeing a basement nearby, Thomas curiously walked down into it. When he got downstairs, he found a coffin placed in the middle of the room. He opened the coffin lid, and there lay the Count inside. At that moment, Thomas finally understood everything. The people at the foot of the mountain had warned him not to go to the castle, saying that a demon lived there, and the Count was that demon. He came out at night to roam and returned to his coffin during the day to sleep. Now that Thomas understood, he decided to kill the Count while he was still incapacitated. The Count knew that Thomas couldn't escape, and his priority now was to deal with Ellen. He picked up the pendant and used magic to manipulate it, intending for Ellen to continue dreaming of him while gradually forgetting Thomas. He also told Ellen that Thomas was no longer around. After manipulating Ellen's dreams, the Count prepared to deal with Thomas. Using the shadow, the Count controlled Thomas, forcing him to open the door himself. Then, he injected an illusion into Thomas's mind, making him see Ellen instead of himself. Meanwhile, Ellen's health was starting to deteriorate. Her friend called for a doctor to examine her. The doctor diagnosed Ellen with somnambulism, sleepwalking, and he thought the issue wasn't too serious. Generally, this condition was caused by improper sleep posture, which obstructed blood flow and caused pressure on the cervical spine, leading to insufficient blood supply to the brain, resulting in sleepwalking. If the condition became severe, it might require the use of sedatives and ropes to bind Ellen, as only this would ensure her proper sleep. While the doctor was explaining, Ellen suddenly began to moan, and the doctor realized her condition had worsened. He used ether to knock Ellen unconscious. As soon as Ellen fell asleep, Thomas woke up, covered in blood. Since then, there was no news of Thomas. Her friend went to ask around at the real estate company, but the owner had also disappeared. At this point, Ellen could only pray that Thomas was still alive. Her friend felt helpless. He had only tried to help out of kindness, but now Thomas was missing and Ellen had developed somnambulism. Until Thomas was found, Ellen had to stay at his friend's house. Her friend was worried that this situation might affect the unborn child. However, the woman felt sorry for Ellen and believed she needed the support and care of everyone. A few days later, the police caught a madman. The madman ate anything he could find and would drain the blood from animals. Worried about the danger of locking him in with other prisoners, the police sent him to see a doctor. The doctor ran a psychiatric clinic with its own isolation cells. When the doctor arrived, he realized that the patient was none other than the owner of the real estate company. The man had lost his sanity and was mumbling incomprehensible words. Meanwhile, at the monastery downstream by the river, a nun discovered Thomas while gathering firewood by the riverbank. Seeing that Thomas was still breathing, she carried him back to the monastery. The nuns prayed and performed an exorcism on Thomas, finally rescuing him from the grip of the demon. The elderly nun had seen similar cases before. She understood that Thomas had lost himself under the influence of the demon, or in other words, he had been cursed by the demon. The elderly nun believed that Thomas should stay at the monastery for a while longer until his condition stabilized before leaving. However, Thomas disagreed. He believed that if he didn't hurry back, Ellen would be in danger. Ignoring the nun's advice, he borrowed a horse horse and hurried towards the town. Ellen was indeed being troubled every day. Every night her condition worsened. The doctor felt that his knowledge was insufficient and couldn't treat her any longer, so he recommended his teacher to come take a look. The doctor's teacher had once been a university professor but was dismissed for focusing too much on studying the occult. After being fired, the teacher devoted himself entirely to the study of mysticism. Now, this teacher was living in the town and had taken an interest in these strange and difficult cases. While everyone was busy trying to find the teacher, the Count's body had also crossed the seas and arrived at their town. The Count was packed into a wooden crate on a sailboat. Just as the locals had said, his arrival would bring curses and chaos to the town. On the ship, the Count spread a plague, and by the time the crew discovered it, it was too late. The crew members who were in better condition felt dizzy and nauseous, while those in worse condition died on the spot. The next morning, the doctor's teacher arrived at their house. He asked about Ellen's basic situation. During the conversation, he gathered several important clues. Ellen said that when she dreamt, she felt as though her soul left her body. She couldn't remember what she had done, and what happened was not under her own conscious control. Many of Ellen's dreams were prophetic. The scenes she saw in her dreams would later happen in reality. Ellen once dreamed of her mother's death. Her father found this ability of hers rather unsettling, and after that he became very distant from Ellen. This caused her to feel increasingly unloved. As a result, she prayed to angels for love, but to her surprise, it was the demon that answered her, continuously tormenting her. From that point on, Ellen's psychological shadow deepened, and only after meeting Thomas did she begin to improve. But after what happened to Thomas, her condition worsened again. That night, Ellen had another episode. The teacher first performed bloodletting therapy on her. After letting out some blood, Ellen did show improvement. The teacher asked Ellen what she saw now. Ellen said she only saw endless darkness and ghostly apparitions of death. The shadow spread out, enveloping the entire town, and it was about to arrive. The teacher quickly asked who was coming. Ellen was once again controlled, and her body twisted unnaturally. In the name of God, the teacher commanded the evil spirit inside her to reveal what was going on.
I shall persist to join you every night, first in sleep, then in your arms.
The evil spirit did not reveal who it was. The teacher deduced that this was a very high-level possession curse, different from an ordinary demon. He explained that people driven by primal desires were more prone to being tormented by demons. The demons lurk in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. When these people have desires, the demon will come to them, and Ellen's desire was to be loved. This demon also recognized that Ellen possessed extraordinary abilities, making her possession more difficult to handle than an ordinary person's. However, the teacher didn't know exactly what kind of demon it was or what would happen next. He needed to go back and research the materials and study it further. Meanwhile, on the cargo ship, the crew began dealing with the bodies. The crew members suspected that the source of the plague was some cargo, so they decided to check the warehouse. They found a suspicious crate and were about to open it. As soon as they opened the box, it was filled with rats.
Has come.
Ellen heard the sound of horses and hurried out to check. It was Thomas returning. Ellen quickly helped him into the house. At that moment, the police arrived to speak with their friend. Their friend's family was in the freight business. The ship that had encountered the accident crashed into the dock, and rats were pouring out of it non-stop. Fearing that the rats might carry the plague, the friend quickly contacted the doctor. However, the Count's coffin was not on the ship. It had been taken away by the real estate boss, who had used a small boat to pull it to the mansion he had previously purchased. Here, the Count planned to continue spreading the curse. The contract was already signed, binding the boss to the Count's service. The curse on Ellen was also a success. At this point, the real estate boss wanted to negotiate terms with the Count, but the Count considered Thomas's survival to be a lingering threat. He didn't want to waste any more time with the real estate boss, so he refused to meet the boss's demands. The next day, the doctor and his teacher went to inspect the situation at the ship. They only found the body of one crew member on board. His blood had been completely drained, and there were animal bite marks on his body. The teacher recalled the mentally ill patient who had eaten raw meat, but the guard said the patient had escaped the previous night, and they hadn't found him yet. The teacher had a sinking feeling that a large-scale disaster was imminent. He instructed the guard to cooperate with the police in searching for the patient. The doctor then went to gather everyone, asking them to meet at his house later that night because there was something important to discuss. That night, Ellen felt a little scared and couldn't sleep, so she thought about asking her friend to stay with her. The teacher shared his findings. Firstly, the This plague was not a simple case of bubonic plague. It was caused by a demon. This could not be explained by science at all. People in the city especially would never believe this. This plague was not a natural disaster, and medical methods couldn't control it. To truly rid the town of the plague, the demon responsible for spreading it had to be sealed. That demon was the vampire Count Nosferatu. While they were discussing these matters, the Count came to find Ellen. He explained his intentions. The Count had been drawn to Ellen's nature. Her summons had awakened him from the grave. They had signed a contract before, and Ellen's husband, for a bag of gold coins, had also signed a contract with the Count. Now the Count wanted Ellen to fulfill the vow she had made back then, to willingly be with him. Ellen refused. She didn't believe Thomas would betray their marriage. She felt certain the Count had used some underhanded means to cause all of this, so she refused to be with him. The Count gave Ellen 3 days. He told her that during these 3 days, she would lose someone dear to her each day. By midnight of the 3rd day, if Ellen still hadn't given him an answer, then the entire town would be destroyed by the plague. With that, the Count left. Ellen woke up from her nightmare. Suddenly, she heard a noise from her friend. Turning around, she saw several large rats crawling on her sister-in-law. This was the first person the Count had meant for Ellen to lose. Now, the plague was spreading uncontrollably, and her friend couldn't be taken to the hospital. The only option was to invite the doctor to their house. After an examination, the doctor confirmed that the sister-in-law hadn't been infected. However, the shock from the previous night had caused her to lose the baby. This was a huge blow to her husband. He believed that the source of everything had started with Ellen. So now, he wasn't prepared to shelter Ellen and Thomas anymore. He didn't want to stay in the town any longer either. He planned to take his wife and daughter to another city. After the doctor and the professor finished researching in the library, they wanted to discuss how to defeat the vampire. The professor explained that the curse followed the people in the town, not the place itself. So now the only way to stop it was to defeat the Count. The books also recorded a way to defeat Nosferatu. Before the curse reached its peak on any day before the rooster crowed, the vampire could be sealed into the ground. When Thomas arrived home, his first thought was to run, to leave the town. Ellen told him they couldn't run. Wherever they went, the curse would follow. Ellen remembered what the Count had told her the day before. Thomas had sold their marriage for a bag of gold coins. She wanted to ask him why he had taken money from others. Thomas felt he hadn't done anything wrong. He did it for his family to earn more money. The money was for a house commission, so how had it become the sale of their love? Just then, Ellen was controlled once again. Thomas wanted to call the doctor to check on her, but Ellen wouldn't let him. She said she would be fine, and then leaned in to seduce him. But Thomas didn't know that all of this was part of the Count's trap. On the other side, the professor had also found other ways to eliminate the vampire. If the sealing couldn't be completed before the rooster crowed, then the cursed one could voluntarily sacrifice themselves. They would seduce the vampire, keeping the vampire distracted and without a sense of time. When the rooster crowed and the sun rose, the vampire would die on their own. The Count continued to take revenge on Ellen, attacking the 2 children of the man's family. The man felt deeply guilty. He thought that if he had gotten up last night, his family might not have died. But in the end, he still blamed Ellen for it. The professor believed that now was not the time for infighting. If they didn't eliminate the Count today, everyone would die. He suggested that everyone go home and deal with their own affairs, and in the afternoon, gather at the man's house to go to the estate together. Ellen went to see the professor home, and during this time, the professor told her about Plan B. If they failed, the lives of the people in the town would be in Ellen's hands. Only if Ellen willingly sacrificed herself could the whole town be saved. In the afternoon, everyone gathered at the man's house, but the man was not there. They thought he might have gone to the cemetery and hadn't returned. The 3 of them went to search. The man, knowing he had contracted the plague and had little time left, wanted to die with his family. By the time Thomas and the others arrived, the man had already passed away. He had the plague virus, and after coming into contact with his wife and daughter, the body carried the plague as well, so it had to be burned. After dealing with everything, Thomas and the others rushed straight to the estate. Ellen knew how dangerous this journey was, so she put on her wedding dress and opened the window, waiting for the Count to arrive. Only when the Count came to her would Thomas be safe. Thomas opened the Count's coffin without even looking and directly stabbed it with a shovel, but to his surprise, it wasn't the Count inside, it was the property owner. This was the Count's strategy to draw them away. When the Count arrived at Ellen, she said she was willing to honor the previous contract, and their souls merged as one. In that moment, the Count truly had Ellen. As passion consumed them, they couldn't hold back their desire. Ultimately, the Count lost track of time, and with the crow of the rooster, the sunlight poured in, destroying the Count's body. When Thomas rushed home, Ellen was nearly gone.